Amid a haze of smoke and smouldering ash, standing on the high ramparts of a tremendous basalt fortress, Mehrunes Dagon dictated the razor-sharp words that would inspire innumerable insurrections. Like forge bellows, his voice boomed, and the Deadlands quaked in its wake. Every word was a cataclysm, and his brave Dremora chronicler risked spontaneous combustion as he committed each symbol to parchment. The Prince of Destruction grinned as he gazed over a sea of oozing, undulating lava. With this manifesto, the waters of Oblivion would flood the mortal realm. Civilizations would crumble like cliff faces as the crimson seas eroded their foundations. Bodies would bob downstream upon rivers of red. Tamriel would endure a torrential downpour of acid rain. Gouts of blood and sulphur would spew from the fissures that tore through the land like chasmic portals to hell. And the people would soothe their parched throats with his razor-fed words, tarnished like red drink. In the desert of rust and wounds, Mehrunes Dagon wrote the Mysterium Xerxes. To new Mythic Dawn initiates, the sphere of Mehrunes the Razor seems simple enough. He is the master of natural disasters. He is the lord of destruction and the tip of the revolutionary spear. Common folk may raise the question, why worship a god who tears down civilizations, who unleashes flood and fire upon the crops of the working class, who relishes in grand schemes of cataclysmic proportions? And largely, they're right. But what most people miss is that Dagon does not carry out these grisly acts purely to sate some sick satisfaction. His motives aren't even entirely clear to himself. He knows that he was created for a very specific purpose, and this purpose has manifested in unpredictable ways, even to the detriment of his creators. Dagon's sphere takes no prisoners, rather it frees them. His sphere does not discriminate or choose sides. It is absolute. It is a weapon to be employed by whoever needs it most. Perhaps that is why some cynics mock the prince. Chamberlain Haskell, for example, speaks of Dagon with a silver tongue, dripping with sardonicism. Do not speak his name to me again, the master of scum, the pawn of every prince of true power, the dupe of every schemer in the 19 voids. There is an irony to Haskell's words. He is indentured in eternal servitude to the ever-changing whims of the mad god. Compared to his master, the simplicity of Dagon's sphere may make him seem weak. But when it comes to altering the fate of Tamriel, the persecuted and the downtrodden turn not to Sheogorath, but to Mehrunes Dagon. Some call Dagon the Flame Tyrant, but anyone who attributes megalomania to the Prince of Destruction is not paying attention. So what is Mehrunes Dagon's motive? Why does he bring destruction and spark sedition? And why is he more akin to a tool than to an autonomous actor? To answer these questions, we need to look at his origins. It is known that Mundus is not the first and not the only attempt at constructing a mortal realm. Adjacent places like Lig exist parallel to Tamriel. We could try to establish when Lig existed, but the concept of time is not so concrete beyond the bounds of the mortal realm, so to create a timeline would be trivial. To keep things simple, Lig was another experiment in the miracle of mortal life. A sovereign realm on the waters of Oblivion, powered by the gods, but governed by the inhabitants. Unfortunately, in Lig, the gods came to the startling realization that, given the freedom to rule themselves, mortals would inevitably seek power, subjugating one another in the process. Thus, Lig would become a lesson for the gods, as they tried to prevent tyranny from corrupting their glorious creation. In the words of Mankar Cameron, the Mundex terrene was once ruled over solely by the tyrant Dread Kings, each to their own dominion, and border wars were fought between their slave oceans. They were akin to the time totems of old, yet evil and full of mockery and profane powers. No one that lived did so outside of the sufferance of the dregs. The contributions of the Magna Gi, the children of Magnus the Architect, were crucial for the success of the mortal experiment. Lig was to be a world of wonder, cresting swells shimmering in the light of Aetherius like omnifaceted sapphires, aquamarine waves breaking against the towers, which soared skyward amid the endless oceans. How would the intelligent crustaceans coexist with the bipedal humanoids inhabiting the island cities? Would they share innovations and debate their diverse philosophies on the nature of existence? The possibilities were endless. But when they gazed upon Lig, the Magnagi saw the macabre reality of mortal civilizations. The sea-dwelling dregs were the first to harness the intelligence the gods had given them. They saw the blue-green world not for its beauty, but for its vacancy. All that existed could be owned, and he who owned the most was the greatest. So the Dread Kings rose to the surface, and once they conquered the oceans, enslaving all life within them, they emerged upon the islands, and their conquest would not end until every corner of Lig was claimed. It is believed that Molag Bal had been the foremost among these tyrant Dread Kings, for he is the lord of domination, and his corruption fell upon Lig like a foul humour. The Magnagi knew they had to intervene. They could not allow absolute power to go unchecked, especially when it led to such unthinkable brutality. The Star Orphans descended from the heavens and delved into the very bowels of Lig to commune in secret. This creation, they knew, must overpower all the powers of the realm, serving as the great equalizer. They came together to artifice a prince of good. They span his likeness in random swaths, and imbued him with Oblivion's most precious and scarce asset, hope. But the Magnagi had been naive to the immense power of such an inspiring concept. Hope, the antonym of despair. With hope, the impossible becomes possible, the powerless become powerful, the slave becomes the master. And that is what happened when Mehrunes the Razor was unleashed upon Lig. Mehrunes climbed from the bowels of the earth, and he revealed himself to the oppressed and the damned, displaying his god body before the gathered masses. When his red arms went up, the fate of Lig was written in words razor-fed. Foremost among all words was Numantia, which means liberty. Mehrunes threw down Lig and cracked the realm's face, declaring each of the 19 and 9 and 9 oceans free. A chant of Numantia resonated across the world, riding red tides all the way to the horizon. And with that battle cry, the tyrant Dread Kings knew their reigns were at an end. A great rebellion rose up and pulled down the towers of Kim El Gar Jig. Kim means royal, Gar means hands, and Jig, I believe, means order. So Dagon and his red legions tore down the towers of order, setting in motion the liberty of Lig. The Templars of the upstart Lorcan were slaughtered, sons were riven, and blood fell like dew from the upper wards down to the lowest pits, where the slaves with maniacal faces took chains and teeth to their jailers, and all hope was brushfire. With their fetters broken, the free people of the limitless Orbis gave praise to Numantia, which is liberty. The Magnagi fled from the chaos, and watched from heaven in stunned disbelief. This was their own creation, and it was running rampant like a red plague. Mehrunes Dagon had been created to counter the power imbalance among mortals, but by imbuing him with the essence of hope, the Razor surpassed the vision of his creators. He saw all injustices on a cosmic scale. He saw the Dread Kings and he tore them down one by one, but he also saw a realm created by omnipotent gods, in which mortals were trapped like insects in a jar. No matter how beautiful the mortal realm was, it was still ultimately ruled over by the gods, at the mercy of their benevolence, their forbearance, even their wrath. Mehrunes Dagon was a tool of this wrath, a punishment for excessive ambition. But the tool turned on its craftsman. Dagon liberated the slaves of Lig from the tyrant Dread Kings, and then he liberated them from the trap of mortality altogether. He saw the tyranny of the gods, and fueled by hope, his revolution was absolute. When viewed through this lens, it's easy to see why Mehrunes Dagon is associated with natural disasters. It's not just because natural disasters are destructive. Fires, earthquakes and floods can be devastating, but they do not discriminate. Even so, some things are more vulnerable to them. If an earthquake hits a province, it's likely that small rural settlements will get off relatively unscathed, while prosperous cities, with great towers and ornate buildings, will topple and fall to ruin. Mehrunes Dagon is a natural disaster that doesn't respond to geological or meteorological pressures, but rather the pressures of authoritarian regimes and unchecked oppression. Dagon's Tamrielic invasions are often depicted as power plays by the prince. He breaks through the liminal barriers separating Mundus from Oblivion and proceeds to stake a claim on the mortal realm. But in each instance, the cult that invoked the Razor did so out of a desperate desire to overthrow oppression of some kind. You can be the judge as to whether these invocations were justified or not, but in the eyes of the summoners, they were. The Order of the Waking Flame wished to sick Dagon and Tamriel in Second Era 582. Their motive, as preached by Sister Seldina, was that the Magna Gi created Mehrunes Dagon in order to unmake the flawed creation of the Mundus. She believed that with the Razor, they could remake the mortal realm in accordance with Magnus the Architect's initial flawless schematics. Sister Seldina was also motivated by other injustices in her life. The catalyst for her extreme views came from the barbaric rise of the Longhouse dynasty. Seldina writes, "When I was young, I was abandoned by unworthy parents. I found shelter at the Priory of the Golden Staff. Followers of Magnus, God of the Sun and Great Architect, cared for me and educated me. The acolytes of the Priory taught me of Magnus's grand design for the Mundus, and his disappointment at the flaws introduced into his creation. One old monk even showed me forbidden texts that revealed a darker design. Some of the Magna Gi once sought a tool to unmake what had been made wrong, in order that it could be remade in accordance with the architect's plan. Then, in my 16th year, the Reach Horde of the Black Drake came, bringing his war against High Rock. The Reach folk burned my priory. They slaughtered my brothers and ravished my sisters, before slaughtering them too. By mere chance I survived, only to be dragged away as captive to the Reach folk. For months they kept me, a helpless drudge in their camp, and I learned the truth of the world's flaw. Suffering is all that awaits us. When the Horde finally broke up, my Reach captors simply discarded me. They destroyed my home, my family, unmade it, so I ran, but I held on to my anger, my thirst for vengeance, and I recalled the story of the Magna Gi and the tool that could unmake this flawed world. Mehrunes Dagon, Prince of Destruction. I sought out his followers in the Order of the Waking Flame and found truth in their teachings that had been hidden from me, and in that truth I began to see a way to enact my vengeance on this imperfect world. And so I worship our Lord and Master, and work diligently every day to see his will done. For now I know that only through Mehrunes Dagon will the perfected work of the Great Architect and the hope of the Magna Gi be brought into being. As for Dagon's second major invasion, the infamous Oblivion Crisis, Mankar Cameron's motives are also articulated, albeit in a considerably more cryptic fashion. In his commentaries, Mankar believed that Tamriel was Lorkhan's plane of oblivion, and that the Aedra had usurped it from him. Thus, to summon Mehrunes Dagon was to liberate the mortal realm from the tyranny of the Divines, much akin to what had taken place in Lig. Without going into too much detail about Dagon's deeds within Oblivion, there is another instance of him invading Tamriel, and that was in the early First Era, when he destroyed the settlement of Old Sofa in Morrowind. Old Sofa was the birthplace of Sofa Sil. The texts do not specify the reasoning for Dagon's assault, but it is possible that Dagon himself, or some unknown invoker, recognized the future potential of Sofa Sil to become a demigod. Perhaps killing Set as a youth would have prevented the eventual reign of the Tribunal, which some heretics would consider a dictatorship of sorts. I could go into much more detail about Mankar Cameron's motivations, but the trend is clear. Wide-scale destruction may obscure our ability to think rationally about Dagon. Revolutions are not nearly as romantic in practice as they are in the honeyed words of philosophers, radicals and zealots. It's a bloody business, but great upheaval requires great sacrifice. In the words of Sister Seldina, the world is flawed, but once it is tempered in flames, it can arise, purified of all imperfections. And this brings us once again to Dagon's association with natural disasters. A forest fire will sear the brush and scorch the bark from the trees, but ash is rich in nutrients that stimulate the growth of new vegetation. Dead plant tissue gives life to new buds. Fire oxidizes the underbrush and cleans the forest floor, and the diminished canopy allows more sunlight to reach the soil. I think you can see where I'm going with this metaphor. Dagon is the conflagration that burns away the old. His flames incinerate the uppermost branches and leaves that bask in the sunlight, while the ground dwellers sit in shadow. But in order to achieve total upheaval, everything must be put to the torch. By following Mephalah's teachings, one could easily assassinate a tyrant, but cutting the head from the snake rarely solves the entrenched problems. There is always another ambitious figure waiting to fill a power vacuum. Dagon's methods are not pretty, they are catastrophic. But that is the price of Numantia, the price of liberty, the price of absolute Orbic freedom. And there you have it, why Mehrunes Dagon is not evil. Thank you so much for watching. Drumora is a new channel, and I'm dedicated to seeing it grow so I can continue to tell these stories. If you'd like to support the channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description. Please, only pledge if you can afford it. I've also started a Discord, so if you'd like to chat to me and anyone else interested in Elder Scrolls and Elden Ring, come join. Thank you so much again. My name's Drew the Daedrologist. You've been watching Drumora, and I'll see you in the next one.